Alex Ovechkin. Ovi is often hailed as one of the greatest players in NHL history, celebrated for his highlight reel goals, exuberant celebrations, and the staggering consistency with which he's filled the net since 2005. His reputation as a generational superstar rests largely on those offensive numbers, particularly the multiple Morris Rocket Richard trophies that showcase his dominance as a pure scorer. Unfortunately, there is much more to hockey than just scoring goals. And if you look past that, Ovechkin's career begins to look far more limited than the praise suggests. For much of his prime, Washington's playoff record was defined by early exits, creating a disconnect between Ovechkin's superstar billing and his actual impact on team success. It wasn't until the Capitals' 2018 Stanley Cup win, over a decade into his career, that his playoff shortcomings temporarily quieted. Even then, his playoff record, 0.50 goals per game, remains inconsistent when measured against other icons, or even his own regular season record, 0.61 goals per game. Ovechkin's style of play has also fueled debate. His impact is heavily tied to power play opportunities and a single, predictable weapon, the devastating one-timer from the left circle. Unlike players such as Sidney Crosby or Peter Forsberg, who controlled the game at both ends of the ice and elevated their teams with vision, physicality, and leadership, Ovi's style has always been more narrowly defined. His brilliance as a finisher often masks the fact that his overall influence on the ice is limited. While many continue to place him among the all-time greats, Ovechkin represents a clear case of hype outpacing holistic impact. He is remembered for goals above all else, but in the broader conversation of complete, game-changing superstars, his legacy doesn't fully measure up. Connor McDavid. Few players in today's hockey generate more excitement than Edmonton's franchise centerpiece, McJesus. His speed and creativity make defenders look helpless, and his scoring totals read like something out of a video game. Multiple Hart and Art Ross trophies, along with 100-point seasons in today's defensive era, have helped build the perception that the league has never seen a talent quite like him. Yet, this hype starts to unravel once the spotlight shifts to the postseason. Despite gaudy individual numbers, his Oilers have advanced past the second round only once, and even that 2022 run ended in a lopsided sweep. Compare that with Wayne Gretzky or Mario Lemieux, whose reputations were built not only on points, but also on Stanley Cups, and the gap between numbers and impact. The difference between a great player and being GOAT status becomes clearer. Another issue is his limited play style. Offensively, he's unmatched, but his defensive play lags far behind. Even during his historic 105-point pace in 2021, he posted a minus rating, underlining how often opponents scored with him on the ice. Advanced analytics regularly show him as far less effective without the puck compared to other elite centers. He remains hockey's most electrifying highlight machine, but the narrative of him as the complete greatest player is overstated. Until his dazzling skill translates into playoff success and produces tangible results, it will be unlikely that McDavid fulfills his potential. Patrick Kane. Applety nicknamed Showtime because of his speed, skill, and a flair for big moments. Patrick Kane was the perfect formula for a superstar. It is no surprise that he was the centerpiece of the Chicago Blackhawks dynasty, winning 3 Stanley Cups between 2010 and 2015. With over 1,200 career points, a Hart Trophy in 2016, and highlight moments that defined an era, Kane is often mentioned among the game's all-time great wingers. Yet Kane's reputation often outweighs the reality. While he's shown in Chicago's Cup runs, his overall playoff record reads 132 points in 143 games, not quite among the best of all time. His production was streaky, and when the Blackhawks weren't contending, his impact faded. Even in his MVP season, when he tallied 106 points, the team was eliminated in the first round, raising questions about how much his brilliance truly translated to winning. Defensively, Kane was always a liability. He has finished with a positive plus-minus in only 4 seasons of his career, an alarming figure for a player consistently hailed as a franchise cornerstone. Advanced metrics paint the same picture. His offensive gifts came with glaring deficiencies without the puck. Much of Chicago's defensive burden during the dynasty fell on players like Michal Handzus and Niklas Hjalmarsson, who covered for Kane's shortcomings. Comparisons to similar flashy scorers like Pavel Bure show the divide. Both were electrifying with the puck, capable of unforgettable plays, but neither offered the two-way completeness of players like Mark Stone. Kane's offensive artistry can't be denied, but the narrative that places him among flawless superstars overlooks the inconsistency and lack of all-around impact that define his career. Evgeny Malkin. Evgeny Malkin has spent nearly 2 decades as one of the NHL's most recognizable Russian stars, a cornerstone of the Pittsburgh Penguins alongside Sidney Crosby. Since his debut in 2006, he has been celebrated as Sidney Crosby's co-star, a player whose mix of size and finesse produced some unforgettable highs. His resume is packed: a Calder Trophy, 2 Art Ross titles, a Hart, a Conn Smythe, and 3 Stanley Cup rings. At his best, like the 113-point season in 2008-09 or his dominant playoff run that spring, Malkin looked like one of the most unstoppable players of his generation. The issue has never been talent, but consistency. Gino averages an impressive 1.17 points per game, yet hasn't played more than 70 games in a season since 2011-12. Injuries and absences repeatedly cut into his impact, leaving the Penguins dependent on Crosby's steadier presence. What fans often remember are the bursts of brilliance, but those moments are separated by long stretches where Malkin was either out of the lineup or far less influential. Even his playoff record, often cited as proof of his greatness, is uneven. Yes, 180 points in 177 games is strong, but outside of his stellar 2009 and 2017 runs, Malkin struggled to take over when the pressure was on. Compared to another Russian player like Sergei Fedorov, who paired elite scoring with defensive reliability and durability, the shortcomings in Malkin's game stand out. The perception of Malkin as a flawless superstar ignores these realities. His career is built on peaks that few could match, but also valleys that undercut his claim as a true franchise cornerstone. For all the skill and hardware, his legacy is less about sustained dominance and more about flashes of brilliance that never quite lasted long enough. John Tavares. Hype has never been in short supply for Johnny T, drafted first overall in 2009. He was heralded as the player who would restore relevance to the New York Islanders and eventually bring them back to contention. The production came quickly: multiple 80-plus point seasons, more than 1,000 career points, and a reputation as one of the NHL's most polished goal scorers and playmakers. His 2018 move to Toronto, framed as the homegrown star returning to rescue a championship-starved franchise, only raised expectations. But the gap between expectations and reality is where Tavares' career often falls under scrutiny. His regular season output remains strong, nearly a point per game, yet the postseason has consistently exposed shortcomings. With the Islanders, he scored some memorable goals, but managed just 22 tallies in 52 playoff games. With the Maple Leafs, the spotlight has only grown harsher. Toronto's repeated first-round failures, despite loaded rosters, have magnified the fact that Tavares' playoff production sits around 0.70 points per game, a noticeable drop from his regular season pace. Criticism doesn't stop at offense. Tavares has never been an elite skater, and his defensive game has often lagged behind other top-tier centers. When placed alongside someone like Steven Stamkos, who not only had higher overall goal-scoring seasons than JT, but also led the team to 2 Stanley Cups. Despite wearing the C in Toronto, Tavares hasn't undergone the same transformation. The numbers ensure his place as one of the better forwards of his era, but the franchise-altering superstar tag has always felt overstated. Until Tavares proves he can lead a contender through playoff adversity, his legacy will remain defined by unmet expectations. Jarome Iginla. Few players embodied the heart and soul archetype quite like Jarome Iginla. A power forward who could score goals, throw hits, and drop the gloves, he became the ultimate fan favorite in Calgary. And over 2 decades in the NHL, he scored 625 goals and more than 1,300 points, carving out a reputation as one of the most complete wingers of his era. Iggy's 2004 playoff run, where he dragged the Flames to within a single win of the Stanley Cup, remains one of the most celebrated individual efforts in recent memory. Yet when his career is measured beyond this narrative, Iginla's legacy starts to look more complicated. For all the talk of dominance, he surpassed the 50-goal mark just twice and struggled to sustain elite production in the later stages of his career. His playoff resume is especially thin. Outside of 2004, he appeared in only 54 postseason games total, with 37 points to show for it. For comparison, Brendan Shanahan, another power forward of the same era, put up comparable career numbers but also captured 3 Stanley Cups and consistently elevated his play when it mattered most. The leadership reputation, too, invites scrutiny. Iginla wore the captain's C on his jersey for 16 seasons, but the Flames reached the playoffs only 5 times in that span. While it is unfair to pin organizational struggles entirely on one player, it raises questions about whether his leadership impact matched the legendary status he was given. Iginla will always be respected as a warrior, a role model, and a beloved figure in Calgary. But strip away the aura of 2004, and his career looks less like that of a generational superstar and more like an exceptional player who gave his heart and soul for the Flames, but could never guide them to glory. Joe Thornton. An absolute superstar during the regular season, Joe Thornton could never come up clutch in the playoffs when it truly mattered. Drafted first overall in 1997, he had the size, vision, and passing touch to dominate offensively, racking up more than 1,500 points and climbing into the NHL's all-time assist leaders. For 2 decades, he was among the league's premier playmakers, the engine of any line he centered. But once April arrived, that dominance faded, leaving his reputation under scrutiny. Thornton's early years in Boston set the tone. In 59 playoff games with the Bruins, he managed just 31 points, quickly drawing the label of a star who went missing when the stakes were high. Jumbo Joe's move to San Jose gave him a fresh start, and while the Sharks became perennial contenders, the script rarely changed. Upsets and early exits defined the Thornton era, most famously in 2009 when the President's Trophy-winning Sharks were stunned in the first round by Anaheim. Thornton produced only 3 points in that series, disappearing when San Jose needed him most. The closest he came to shedding the narrative was in 2016, when San Jose finally reached the Stanley Cup final. But a 6-game loss to Pittsburgh meant the underachiever tag followed him to retirement. When put side by side with players such as Ron Francis or Henrik Zetterberg, leaders who elevated their games in the postseason, Joe rarely delivered those defining playoff moments that cement true greatness. His career totals ensure Hall of Fame status, and fans will remember his slick passes and unique presence on the ice. However, when ranked among the greatest centers of all time, the praise seems overreaching. Thornton was a brilliant regular season talent whose inability to deliver in the playoffs leaves his legacy lacking. Rick Nash. Drafted first overall in 2002, Rick Nash entered the league with all the tools of a future superstar: size, speed, and a natural scoring touch. By his second season, he had already captured the Rocket Richard Trophy with 41 goals, instantly becoming the centerpiece of a Columbus franchise that desperately needed an identity. For a moment, it looked like the NHL had its next great power forward. But Nash's career never fully lived up to the billing. Across more than 1,000 games, he finished with 805 points. Strong production, but short of the generational expectations placed on him. The postseason exposed his limitations even more. In 9 years with Columbus, the Blue Jackets never won a single playoff game, and Nash's later stints in New York and Boston only added 18 goals in 89 playoff appearances. For a player touted as a game-breaking scorer, those numbers are underwhelming to say the least. The disappointment becomes clearer when set against his peers. Wingers like Daniel Alfredsson and Pavel Datsyuk shared similar skill sets, yet they consistently elevated their teams when the stakes were highest. Nasher, by comparison, too often looked like a regular season highlight reel who couldn't find the same impact when the chips were down. That doesn't erase what he brought to the game. Nash gave Columbus credibility in its formative years, represented Canada with distinction by winning 2 Olympic gold medals, and reinvented himself later as a dependable two-way player. Still, his legacy falls short of superstardom. For all his talent, he will be remembered as an outstanding player, not the Hall of Fame level force as he was touted to be. Ilya Kovalchuk. Drafted first overall in 2001 by the Atlanta Thrashers, Ilya Kovalchuk entered the NHL as a dynamic scorer with a lethal shot and blazing speed. Right from the start, Kovalchuk piled up highlight reel goals and quickly earned a reputation as one of the league's most exciting wingers. His career totals: 443 goals and 876 points in 926 games, prove just how gifted he was offensively. But talent alone doesn't guarantee greatness, and that's where Kovalchuk's story falters. In Atlanta, he was the centerpiece of a franchise desperate for an identity, yet Kovi's presence never translated into meaningful success. The Thrashers made the playoffs just once during his 8 seasons, bowing out in a first-round sweep. For all his flash, Kovalchuk often lacked the defensive responsibility, consistency, and leadership expected of a true franchise player. When he landed in New Jersey in 2010, the hype hit new heights. Capped off by a controversial 15-year contract, he played a key role in the Devils' run to the 2012 Stanley Cup Final. But just a year later, he stunned the hockey world by leaving for the KHL. Walking away in his prime cemented the perception of a career unfinished, and for many fans, it felt like a betrayal. Contemporaries like Alexander Mogilny, who had better peak seasons and titles to go with it, or Pavel Bure, another flashy winger but delivered on the big stage, the difference is stark. Those players combined scoring brilliance with longevity, leadership, and a winning pedigree. Kovalchuk, by contrast, never bridged the gap between personal talent and team success. His name will always be tied to breathtaking skill, but also to unmet expectations, the hallmark of an overrated star. Phil Kessel. One of hockey's strangest contradictions is the career of Phil Kessel. He had elite production without the aura of a true franchise superstar. His raw numbers are pretty good. Over 400 goals, nearly 1,000 points, and one of the longest Iron Man streaks in NHL history. Few players have been that consistent for that long. Unfortunately, to be compared with the best, you need to match what they did on the ice, and Kessel's reputation often drifted into an inflated middle ground, treated as a franchise savior when his play rarely justified it. In Toronto, he was supposed to be the cornerstone of a rebuild, but while his 30-goal seasons looked good on paper, they rarely translated into team success. Critics argued he was a scorer who could rack up numbers without ever controlling the flow of a game, offering little in terms of leadership or defensive responsibility. His quiet, detached demeanor only reinforced the sense that he wasn't built for the spotlight of a market demanding a true franchise star. Later in Pittsburgh, he finally found success, playing second fiddle to Sidney Crosby. Those Stanley Cups highlighted the truth about Kessel. He could shine when the pressure wasn't on him, but he was never the engine of a championship team. That's the crux of why many label him overrated. Phil was a 5th overall pick, once billed as a franchise winger, but he never even reached the level of Marian Gaborik, who carried the LA Kings to win the Cup, or Martin St. Louis, who has a consistently higher goal-scoring record both in regular season and playoffs. The Thrill will be remembered fondly for his scoring, his longevity, and his quirky personality, but history will likely place him as a very good star who fell short of true generational greatness. Marian Hossa. A career teetering between greatness and overstatement, Hossa statistically checks nearly every box. over 500 goals, more than 1,100 points, and 3 Stanley Cups across a long, consistent career. Few wingers could blend size, skill, and two-way responsibility as seamlessly as he did. Yet the conversation around Haas as a superstar has always felt inflated compared to his actual impact. His prime years in Ottawa and Atlanta showcased his scoring talent, reliable 30 to 40 goal seasons, and even back-to-back 90-point campaigns with the Thrashers. But the teams he played on rarely improved because of him. Unlike true franchise changers, Haas never dragged a weak roster into contention. Atlanta in particular stayed irrelevant despite his numbers, which fueled the perception that he was more of a stat producer than a game breaker. The mercenary years added to the oddity of his career arc. He chased a cup with Pittsburgh in 2008 and Detroit in 2009, losing in the final both times before finally finding success with Chicago. On the Blackhawks, he was undeniably valuable, but he wasn't the face of the dynasty. That spotlight belonged to Jonathan Toews and Duncan Keith. Haas thrived as an elite complementary piece, but he wasn't the one driving the narrative. When stacked against elites such as Jerry Curry or Daniel Alfredson, his lack of singular dominance becomes clear. Haas earned his Hall of Fame place through consistency, longevity, and winning in the right situation. But the idea of him as a generational superstar oversells what he was. An excellent, reliable star who fit perfectly as a secondary pillar, not the foundation. P.K. Sabban. Another one of those players who divides opinions, Subby was beloved for his charisma and flair, yet often criticized for a career that never quite matched the superstar billing. Drafted by Montreal in 2007, he burst onto the scene as one of the league's most exciting defensemen, highlighted by his 2013 Norris Trophy win. At his peak, he was electric, capable of end-to-end rushes and highlight reel plays that energized fans. But zooming out, the gap between reputation and reality is obvious. Subban's offensive peaks, like his stellar 2014 playoff run with 14 points in 17 games, were real. Yet over 96 career postseason games, he managed just 62 points, far behind the consistency of true defensive greats like Nicklas Lidstrom. Take Chris Pronger, for example, the Norris-level skill and intimidation factor, things Subby could never mimic. His defensive play was always his weak spot. Risky decisions, turnovers, and lapses in coverage overshadowed the highlight moments. The 2016 blockbuster trade for Shea Weber summed it up perfectly. Montreal sought reliability. Nashville wanted star power. With the Predators, PK fit nicely into a stacked blue line, but he wasn't the anchor. By the time he reached New Jersey, his numbers and impact had dipped significantly, and the Norris conversations were long gone. Subban retired in 2022 with 467 points in 834 games. Good, but not generational. He never won a cup, never cemented himself as the kind of player who could tilt a franchise, and often leaned more on personality than production, style over substance. Fun, flashy, and memorable? Yes. But a true superstar? That label overshoots what his career was. Teemu Selanne. The Finnish Flash is remembered as one of the NHL's most electric scorers, but his reputation doesn't quite line up with his overall career impact. His rookie season with Winnipeg in 1992-93 remains unforgettable. 76 goals, 132 points, and records that still stand. That debut alone cemented his place in hockey lore, yet after the hype of that first year, his career arc revealed more streakiness than sustained dominance. From 1993 onward, Selanne never reached 70 goals again, managing just 3 more 50-goal seasons over 2 decades. Injuries slowed him, but so did inconsistency. His stints in San Jose and Colorado were especially underwhelming. In Colorado, surrounded by Hall of Fame talent like Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and Paul Kariya, he was expected to thrive. Instead, he posted only 16 goals in 78 games, a massive disappointment for a player touted as a generational star. The playoffs also exposed limitations. Despite lengthy opportunities on strong rosters, Saland didn't capture a Stanley Cup until 2007 with Anaheim, well past his prime. Even then, it was younger teammates, Ryan Getzlaf, Corey Perry, and Scott Niedermayer, who carried the Ducks. Across 130 playoff games, Saland produced 88 points, respectable but far from the clutch performances delivered by contemporaries like Mike Bossy or Luc Robitaille. Saland's charisma, speed, and fan appeal made him one of the league's most marketable stars. But when judged strictly by consistency, playoff impact, and ability to elevate teams on the biggest stage, his legacy tilts more toward being a beloved scorer than one of the true all-time greats. A player with one of the greatest single-season debuts ever, but a career that never matched that promise. Mats Sundin. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Mats Sundin was the face of the Toronto Maple Leafs, a towering Swedish center who wore the captain's C for over a decade. Sudden Death Sundin was durable, consistent, and respected league-wide. He produced 1,349 points across nearly 2 decades, and as the first European player drafted first overall, his name carried historical weight. In Toronto, he became the cornerstone of one of hockey's most scrutinized franchises. But consistency isn't the same as dominance, and that's where Sundin's reputation gets inflated. For someone often spoken of as a generational forward, he never cracked the 100-point barrier. His career high was 94, far below the gaudy totals of Steve Yzerman or Joe Sakic, players who not only put up numbers, but also had stretches of carrying their teams to glory. Sundin, by comparison, hovered around 30 goals and 70 to 80 points most years. Strong, but hardly game-breaking. The playoff picture doesn't help his case either. In 91 postseason games, he tallied 82 points, but never led Toronto to the Stanley Cup final. Despite years of being the guy, he lacked that defining postseason run that cements true legends such as Joe Sakic. Steve Yzerman, for instance, also endured years of playoff failure, but reinvented his game to deliver championships. Mats never had that turning point. Much of his elevated reputation can be traced to the Toronto spotlight, where every achievement is magnified. He was reliable and highly skilled, but rarely transcendent. In truth, Sundin was less an unstoppable superstar and more a very good player who lasted a long time, and that distinction is what makes him overrated. Alexei Yashin. Few names in NHL history carry the same stigma of underachievement as Alexei Yashin. Entering the league in 1993, the Russian center looked every bit the franchise cornerstone. Tall, skilled, and able to put up consistent offensive numbers. With the Ottawa Senators, he posted multiple 30-goal, 70-point seasons and quickly became their offensive leader. Not groundbreaking, but still very good numbers. On paper, he had all the makings of a superstar. The problem was never his skill, but his impact when it mattered most. In the playoffs, Yashin's game routinely vanished. Across 48 postseason appearances with Ottawa, he managed just 27 points, often criticized for a lack of intensity and urgency. While contemporaries like Sergei Fedorov, another Russian, and Mike Modano thrived under pressure, Yashin seemed to fade, reinforcing the perception that he wasn't built for the big stage. Then came the bad contract disaster. His legacy was sealed after the infamous 2001 trade to the New York Islanders. The Isles not only dealt away Zdeno Chara and the draft pick that became Jason Spezza, but they also handed Yashin a staggering 10-year, $87.5 million contract, one of the worst in NHL history. Expected to be a franchise-changing superstar, he never scored more than 75 points in a season with New York. Worse, his playoff woes followed him, producing just 11 points in 24 postseason games. Instead of redefining the Islanders, Yashin came to symbolize wasted potential and bloated contracts. The raw ability was never in question, but the drive and consistency needed to reach true superstar status were absent. In the end, he is remembered less for what he achieved, and more for how little he delivered compared to the hype.